It was just past 7:30 in the evening when the unthinkable happened. A US Army Apache attack helicopter, one of the most heavily armored aircraft ever built, dropped out of the night sky and slammed into the dark waters of the Gulf of Oman, just outside the Strait of Hormuz. 2 American pilots. Freezing black water. No rescue ship close enough to reach them in time. What unfolded over the next 2 hours would not only become one of the most dramatic rescues in modern naval history, it would rip open a secret that US intelligence had been quietly tracking for weeks. A secret with Moscow's fingerprints all over it. Stick with us until the end, because what you're about to hear changes everything we thought we knew about this war. And tell us in the comments, did you already suspect Russia was arming Iran behind the scenes? According to US Central Command, the Apache had been flying a routine night patrol over the strait, the same narrow choke point that has become the beating heart of this entire conflict, the artery through which a fifth of the world's oil flows every single day. Then, without warning, it was hit. At first, officials assumed it was just another Shahid one-way attack drone. The cheap Iranian weapons that have been swarming and harassing commercial shipping in these waters for months. But wreckage recovered from the crash site told a very different story. Analysts found fragments of a guidance and targeting module far more advanced than anything Iran has fielded before, components that, according to multiple defense officials, bear the unmistakable signature of Russian military engineering. In other words, this wasn't just an Iranian drone. This may have been a Russian upgraded killer, hunting in the dark. Both crew members survived the violent impact and were thrown into the open water, alone, in pitch darkness, deep inside hostile territory, with absolutely no idea if anyone was coming for them. And here is where this story becomes something almost unbelievable. Before any crewed ship could get underway, before a single rescue helicopter could even spin up its rotors, something else arrived first, racing low and fast across the black water under nobody's direct hand. A fully unmanned surface vessel, remotely operated by sailors stationed miles away, cut through the waves, located both pilots using infrared cameras that can see heat signatures in pitch-black conditions, pulled them safely aboard, and rushed them to a rendezvous point where a crewed helicopter was waiting to hoist them to safety. Total time from splashdown to rescue, right around 2 hours. And for that first, most dangerous phase, not one single American sailor or soldier was physically present on the water. Think about that for a second. If you were floating out there in the dark, not knowing if help was even possible, would you trust a robot to find you before anything else did? Let us know what you'd be thinking in that moment. The vessel that pulled off this incredible rescue is barely the size of a small fishing boat, just over 13 feet long. Built through a partnership between a Gulf region shipbuilder and an American defense technology company. It's capable of blasting across the water at speeds well above 40 knots. Can stay out at sea for more than a day and a half without needing to refuel or resupply. And is absolutely packed with electro-optical and infrared sensors that give its remote operators a crystal-clear view of the ocean surface. Day or night, rain or storm. But here's the detail that should give you chills: this was the very first time this vessel had ever done this in real combat. Not in a drill. Not in a simulation. Not on some calm training exercise off the coast of California. The real thing, survivors in the water, lives on the line, and it worked. Exactly when it mattered most. For years, the US Navy had been quietly testing this technology in these exact waters, not in a sterile training environment, but live. In the chaotic, unpredictable reality of the Persian Gulf. And that decision, to test in the real world instead of a controlled bubble, is almost certainly what made this rescue possible. The system already knew these currents. It already knew this darkness. It had already learned how to operate here, long before it needed to save 2 human lives. Now let's talk about what actually went down, literally, because the aircraft involved here was not some lightweight, expendable drone. The AH-64E Apache is widely considered one of the most survivable, most heavily armed attack helicopters ever built. It's powered by twin turboshaft engines, each producing close to 1,900 horsepower. It carries a 30mm chain gun capable of firing more than 600 rounds per minute, up to 16 Hellfire missiles slung beneath its wings, and a targeting system so advanced it can track over 100 potential threats simultaneously. Its armor is specifically designed to keep its crew alive through hits that would obliterate almost any other aircraft in the sky. So how does something like this go down? The answer is the part of this story that has Pentagon officials deeply alarmed. Initial assessments pointed to a typical Shahid drone, a fire-and-forget weapon that doesn't maneuver, doesn't think. Just flies in a straight line until it hits something or runs out of fuel. Iran has launched these by the hundreds throughout this conflict, mostly against ships and fixed targets moving at predictable speeds and altitudes. But the wreckage tells a different story. U.S. defense analysts now believe the weapon that struck this Apache was something new, a next-generation loitering munition. Slower than a missile but far smarter, harder to detect on radar, and equipped with a guidance system that multiple officials say did not exist in Iran's arsenal even a few months ago. A guidance system that satellite imagery and intelligence reports increasingly tie back to one place, Russia. Have you been following the reports about cargo flights moving between Russian military airbases and airfields inside Iran over the past several months? Officially, Moscow has called this routine logistics cooperation. But unofficially, multiple U.S. and allied intelligence officials believe those flights have been quietly delivering something far more dangerous, components and guidance kits that upgrade Iran's existing drone fleet from crude, predictable weapons into something that can now track and hit a moving military aircraft instead of just a stationary ship or building. If that assessment holds up, then what happened to this Apache wasn't just an unlucky hit from an old Iranian drone. It may have been the first real demonstration of a Russian improved weapon, tested in live combat, against a frontline American aircraft. Drop a comment if you think this changes the entire shape of this conflict, because a lot of analysts certainly do. The U.S. Army currently operates roughly 900 Apache helicopters across all its variants, aircraft that have flown in every major American military engagement since the late 1980s, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. Losing even one of these aircraft is never just a financial hit, even at tens of millions of dollars. It's a message. And if Russian fingerprints really are on the weapon that did it, it's a message that may have been written, at least in part, in Moscow. But before we get to what happened next, the response that came less than a day later, we need to talk about the two men who actually survived this. Because make no mistake, they didn't make it out of that wreckage and that ocean by accident. They made it out because of years of brutal, repetitive training that kicked in the instant everything went wrong. Every single Navy and Army aviator who flies over open water goes through a training program called helicopter underwater egress training, though most pilots just call it the dunker, and anyone who's been through it will tell you the name fits perfectly. Pilots are strapped into a full-scale mock helicopter cabin, wearing complete flight gear, secured with a 5-point harness. And then the entire cabin is dropped into a deep pool. The moment it hits the water, the cabin flips upside down. It inverts completely. It sinks. And in that disorienting, terrifying instant, total darkness, water rushing in, harness still locked tight, door sealed shut, pilots have to find their way out using nothing but feel and memory. They're trained to do one thing first that goes against every survival instinct: pause. Wait for the violent spinning and tumbling to stop. Only then do they begin locating their primary and secondary exit points, not by sight, because there is none, but by touch, by muscle memory. By counting handholds they've memorized through dozens of repetitions. They train with emergency underwater breathing devices for situations where the water is too deep, too dark, or too cold to simply hold their breath long enough to escape. They train on deploying life rafts in open ocean. They train on signaling for rescue using flares, strobes, and radios. They train on something just as important as any of that, staying mentally calm, hour after hour, floating in open water. With no idea whether anyone is even looking for them yet. What those two pilots did Monday night, escaping a sinking, inverted aircraft in pitch-black water, surviving the shock of impact. Staying alert and coherent enough to be located and rescued by an unmanned vessel, none of that was luck. It was years of relentless preparation, finally being called upon in the absolute worst 2 hours of their lives. Honestly, if you were strapped into that seat, lights out, water rushing in, could you keep your head clear enough to remember every step? Tell us the truth in the comments. A lot of people say they could. Fewer actually could. The rescue itself had barely concluded before the next, far more dangerous phase of this story began. President Trump confirmed publicly that an American military helicopter had been shot down, and in a striking departure from previous statements. About this conflict, he directly referenced what he called increasingly sophisticated foreign weapons technology being funneled into Iranian hands. He didn't name Russia outright. He didn't have to. Everyone listening understood exactly who he meant. His message to the American public was short, blunt, and unmistakable. The United States would respond, and it would respond decisively. Less than 24 hours after the Apache hit the water, U.S. Central Command confirmed that American forces had launched what officials described as decisive self-defense strikes against Iranian military targets. The operation began at 5 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time and continued until just before 9 o'clock that night, nearly 4 hours of sustained strikes. Carried out on direct orders from the Commander-in-Chief. The targets weren't random. According to Central Command, American forces struck Iranian air defense radar installations, drone command and control bunkers. And, for the first time in this entire conflict, at least one facility that U.S. intelligence believes was being used specifically to receive, store, and assemble foreign-supplied drone components. Components, officials strongly hinted, that had arrived from a certain country to the north. Central Command publicly called it a proportional response to escalating Iranian aggression. But inside the Pentagon, according to multiple officials speaking on condition of anonymity, a very different phrase is being used behind closed doors. They're calling it the opening move of a new and far more dangerous phase of this war, one where the enemy on the other side of the radar screen isn't just Iran anymore. It's Iran, with Russia's hand quietly, deliberately guiding the blade. Tonight, 2 American pilots are alive, against incredible odds, because of split-second training, raw courage, and a robot boat that had never done this before in real life but performed flawlessly anyway when it counted most. One $60 million aircraft is gone, sitting at the bottom of the Gulf of Oman. And across Washington, the question on everyone's mind isn't just, what will Iran do next? It's a much bigger, much scarier question. How deep does Russia's hand already reach into this war? And what happens when Moscow realizes its technology was just used against and identified by the United States military? If you want to see how this escalation unfolds from here, and what happens when Russia responds to America striking targets connected to its own weapons, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because the next chapter of this story is coming fast. And you will not want to miss it. What do you think Russia's next move will be? Drop your predictions below, we read every single one.